Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this show segment, we are going to be talking about three important things. The first thing we're going to talk about is how Kawhi Leonard ended up leaving the game, of the Clippers game. They were up by 22 points, and that sort of affected their lead. So we are going to be talking a little bit about that. We are also going to be looking at OG Anunoby and his his return to the Knicks and the Knicks rotation, and to sort of see exactly what that means, what that could mean for the Knicks going into the season. And as their season continues, they've noticeably been much worse without their players that they recently acquired in trade, and that makes total sense because what else can you really expect from a team that is dealing with all these kinds of injuries? I don't really expect them to win as much when they don't have some of their best players, and I think that's a very fair assumption. But regardless, and then after that, we are also going to continue doing our recap for the rest of the NBA. And all the NBA games that went down the other night. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody, as always, to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, and the link that's displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. It is gsmcpodcast.net. Helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys, and put your comments directly in front of my screen. So with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and talk about the Los Angeles Clippers, the other LA team, the other team that's going to be leaving Crypto Arena soon to get their own arena. And they recently matched up against the Timberwolves. Everything was looking just fine. All the players were playing well. They were up by 22 points. And then boom, Kawhi Leonard gets hurt. Well, he leaves the game due to back spasms. So now his health is questionable. We've seen Kawhi Leonard play the entirety of the season, and he's been, for someone who is sort of known for being a load manager, and someone who is being known as to not really play as many games as he should, and has that reputation of not really playing as many games as he should. The fact that he's been healthy throughout the entirety of the regular season is very, very impressive, and a lot of people would consider that to be impressive. And we don't really expect Kawhi Leonard as a player to play every single game in the regular season. That's just that's sort of not his character. He more or less shows up in the postseason more times. Then that's when the team really needs him. If we're going to be real, if we're going to be frank, the logic behind Kawhi Leonard not playing, it makes total sense. It makes total sense why Kawhi would end up wanting to sit down a lot of games, simply because those games don't necessarily bring as much. They aren't valuable games. If they're already in a playoff spot and they know that they're going to be in a playoff spot, they need to ensure that Kawhi Leonard is going to be healthy come the postseason. Now, while I think it's smart, I also don't necessarily agree with it, because as a player, you are supposed to play through thick and thin. That's just my take on it, however. You're supposed to be able to play through, not play through injury. I know setting that standard is a little bit crazy, given how Kobe Bryant has set that standard, and not everybody is going to be Kobe Bryant. But at the same time, a basketball player should play every single game like their life depended on it, because essentially that's what they're doing for a living. And it's a little bit unfair seeing how they could just sit out whenever they want. And right now the NBA is actually doing a really good job in introducing new rules to try to encourage these players to play more games. But that could bring a lot of good to the league, but it could also bring a lot of bad to the league, because with that game eligibility requirement that's newly introduced this season, we could start seeing a lot more people sort of win awards, but players that don't necessarily deserve to win the award over others strictly win it because they meet that game eligibility, and some of the good players might not. Like, for example, Joel Embiid, if he does not make All-NBA first team, or if he does not make any of those type of teams, doesn't make the All-Star team, it's mostly because of like injuries, and it just wouldn't be fair to just assess those injuries in player awards, because like injuries are sort of a thing that players can't really control. Even though I do agree with the saying that your best ability is your availability, and if you aren't there when your team needs you, then what is the point? That is just me, however. Now, let's talk about the game itself. So, the Clippers, they were up by 22 points, and then Kawhi Leonard ended up going out with his back spasm, and the Clippers ended up losing this game, which is which is not really surprising, now that I think about it. I mean, they were playing the Timberwolves, and it's not like the Clippers aren't known for blowing leads 24/7, because that's exactly what the Clippers are known for. They're known for losing games that they should end up winning, and this isn't the first time that they have a collapse like this against a good team. So what can go wrong will go wrong with this Clippers team, with every Clippers team that plays. And it's it's really concerning that Kawhi Leonard ended up leaving this game, and the minute that he left, the team was losing. Like, they didn't have Kawhi, so like it makes sense that the team would end up losing. But you can't collapse like that after being up 22 points. You just can't collapse. You have to know how to close out these games. You just can't do that. And it's something that the Clippers have struggled with every single year. Every single time. They always struggle with this. I don't know what it is. This team, they just know how to lose in the fourth quarter, and it's plagued their franchise for centuries, for years. It's plagued them. They couldn't hold on to a lead in the bubble. They couldn't hold on to a lead against the Houston Rockets. They couldn't hold on to a lead against the Spurs. It's just something that plagues them every single time. They could not stop Chris Paul when he was on Phoenix. They just go through the same motions every time, and it's like nothing changes. And it's sort of gotten to that point, like, when are we going to see a change in this team? And I understand it's the regular season, so I totally understand that there's still time. There's no guarantee that Kawhi Leonard is going to stay out for the remainder of the playoffs. He's not out like Joel Embiid. Well, Joel Embiid still could return, but he's not out like Ben Simmons. I did not want to use his name, but it's whatever. So he's not out like Ben Simmons, and regardless of that, like, he could still make an impact in the playoffs. But it's just that injury is sort of concerning, because what if it gets re-aggravated over in the postseason? That's happened a lot, and that and remember, in the season that the Clippers ended up making it to the Western Conference Finals, they did not have Kawhi, but Kawhi went down in the playoffs due to injury. And it's a little bit odd for me. Like, not only does this affect like the Clippers season, but it also affects like my rankings on Kawhi whenever those things happen. Like, simply put, Kawhi Leonard has always been on good teams. He gets the lion's share of the credit whenever things go right, and then gets almost zero criticism whenever things go wrong. Maybe it's because he's quiet, so the media just decides to leave him alone, because that makes sense. Like, I mean, you're not going to really spend time on someone who just doesn't want to talk. But just because he's quiet doesn't mean that he's humble. And that's sort of been the problem that I have with Kawhi. Like, I respect his game. He's a great basketball player. He is one of the best playoff performers that I've ever seen. But again, like, he gets no criticism whenever things go wrong. And getting injured when your team needs you healthy, I'm sorry, that counts as things going wrong, because the team is counting on you and you're not there for them in that moment. Regardless whether you get injured or not, you should know how to protect your body. And you should know, like, when the team needs you, and, like, you should know, like, just mentally in your head, okay, now is not the time to get hurt. And arguably, maybe even play through the injury half the time. I know Harden played through his hamstring problems. It ended up hurting the Brooklyn Nets, but he still played through them, showing his heart. LeBron James, he allegedly played through a broken hand in the NBA Finals. Kobe Bryant, he broke his finger, still played through that. And it's all of these things that it's like, all of these players, they've shown that they can play through this injury, and it's like, regardless of whether or not they're 100%, they still try to play through it because they know that their team needs them. And I don't see Kawhi Leonard doing that. Now, I might just be a little bit biased now because my feelings towards Kawhi are a little bit meh, but I just don't see him do that whatsoever. And this could definitely go into effect in the playoffs. Now, does that mean the Clippers should worry? I mean, I'm not entirely sure, because then again, when Kawhi Leonard was out in the playoffs, the team ended up making it much farther without him. So, how is that going to work? Is he going to go, are they going to go farther with him, or are they going to not go as far with him? And I think the biggest factor of the playoffs for the Clippers is going to be James Harden. I really think that he's going to be the make or break for this team. The team needs to have him consistent and needs to have him hitting shots. And the thing about him is that in the postseason, he always disappears. It happens every single time. Any important game that you can think of that James Harden has been a part of, he ended up not performing, underperforming, or playing worse than what he usually does. That's just what he does. That's the standard for James Harden in the postseason. Just in the postseason. The regular season, he is one of the best regular season players ever. But in the playoffs, that's when things get really, really bad. He only has, off the top of my head, he only has just about 2 very good games in important situations. Like, first round games, I'm sorry, those aren't really a big deal. It's the second round and the third round that James Harden really struggles in. And there aren't really that many dominant performances that you can pick out from any of those series and be like, oh, James Harden was insane in this series, because there would always be that one game where he just underperforms. And the thing is, it's every single season with Harden. You can look at the numbers and you can look at his play style and you can look at what he does. It's every single season. And that's something that they just can't afford to have, especially with their reputation as being the Clippers. Because, like I said earlier, what can go wrong will go wrong. And it's very concerning, because this is a team that is literally the favorites to win it all. Like, I believe that at one point they actually had even higher odds than the Boston Celtics to make the finals and win it all. So it's not like this team doesn't have the pieces that it needs. No, they are the favorites. And usually when the Clippers are the favorites to win at anything, they don't perform. They don't meet expectations. And it's very concerning. Again, one Western Conference Finals appearance in their entire lifetime as an organization. And they did that without Kawhi Leonard. That's very, very concerning, especially after the fact that they literally just lost to the number 1 seed, a team that they're most likely expected to go into the playoffs. And they didn't even have Karl Anthony Towns. I almost forgot to mention that. The Timberwolves, they don't have Karl Anthony Towns, and they've still been able to keep afloat in this game, and even end the game winning by 18. The final score was 118-100. Anthony Edwards played 37 minutes and ended the game with 37 points. Nickeil Alexander-Walker ended the game with 28 points, 9 of 10 from the field, 5 of 6 from 3, and Mike Conley ended the game with 23 points, 9 of 15 from the field. So when you get all of these players, like, these guys should not have been having the types of games that they were having. But it's like, if it's on the Clippers, anything is possible. And this, I'm not making that up, because the first time the Clippers blew a 3-1 lead under Doc Rivers, when they had Lob City, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan, when they were in the process of blowing game 5, I believe, when they were in the process of blowing it, this literally a random role player just started hitting all of the threes, every single one of them. And it's like role players outdoing themselves against the Clippers is nothing new. And that is a very big problem with that team. But with that, we are out of time for the first segment. So I'm done talking about the Clippers. I'm done talking down about them, because they still are a good team. Hopefully, we'll see if they can do something in the playoffs. I doubt it, but the next segment we are going to be talking about the New York Knicks. OG Anunoby finally returned from his injury, so I will be touching on that, and as well as their previous game with the 76ers. So I will be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be talking about the New York Knicks and how OG Anunoby finally returned from his injury after going through surgery on just to get his injury worked out. And before I begin with this segment, I'd like to remind everybody, as always, to please remember to use the link in the description below, as well as it's the same link that's in the ticker displayed on every single show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys, puts your comments directly in front of my screen. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and talk about OG Anunoby, who is back after being injured for 3 weeks. He ended up needing to undergo surgery. However, that surgery was the quickest way for him to recover. And immediately after he comes back from his injury, he provides impact to the New York Knicks and winning this game against the 76ers. Now, if you remember in some of my previous NBA recaps, I was talking about the Sixers going up against the Knicks and how they played in one of the lowest scoring games of the season, actually the lowest scoring game of the season, where the Sixers ended up scoring 79 points while the Knicks only scored 73. And I mentioned how they did not have some key players to contribute assist them in trying to make this game a little bit more competitive. And nobody was knocking down shots. Well, in this game, the Knicks were knocking down shots. OG Anunoby, he ended the game with 14 points. He's not that good of a player on offense. However, he is very valuable on the defensive side of the ball. And him being back obviously bolstered the team, and it made the team a lot better than what they usually are. Makes sense because he's a contributing player. The final score was 106-79. Now, if you notice, the Sixers, they ended up scoring the exact same amount of points as they did in their win. However, the Knicks ended up completely outplaying them and scoring 106 points, which is about 33 more points than they initially did. So obviously, the addition of OG Anunoby is putting this Knicks team back on the right track. And now that OG is back, there needs to be now they're just waiting on Julius Randle. And the scoring for the rest of the team, nothing really stands out. It was more of a team effort in beating the Sixers than it was Jalen Brunson ended the game with 35 or DiVincenzo ended the game with 29, like most of the games. However, I'm not saying that the Villanova brothers didn't perform. Now, Jalen Brunson ended the game 7 of 12 from the field. Josh Hart ended the game 8 of 16 from the field. And DiVincenzo ended the game 4 for 11. So, combined, Brunson ended with 20. Josh Hart ended with 20. DiVincenzo ended with 16. So, they ended the game with 56 points. That is well over half of the team's scoring. So, and I almost forgot about this. Josh Hart was just 2 rebounds. I can't do math. He was 1 rebound shy of getting a 20-20 game. He ended the game with 20 points, 19 rebounds, and 10 assists. Now, in his first 4 seasons of the NBA, he was unable to get a single triple-double. However, on the Knicks, he's gotten 4 in 18 games. So, with this in mind, coming in from Josh Hart, he's doing all of the dirty work. If he is sort of their Draymond Green type of player. He's with a little bit more scoring added to the mix. And I don't want to say that in a way that Draymond Green doesn't score. Now he doesn't score. Before, when in around 2015, 2014, 2016. Again, those years are random, I understand. 2014, 2015, 2016. In those years, Draymond Green was a scorer. He was able to put the ball on the floor and he was able to score. Obviously, he was more of a facilitator. He's always been a facilitator and he's always filled that role to the T. However, he was also a scorer back then. People forget that Draymond Green played in Game 7 of the NBA Finals against LeBron and dropped 35 points, while Stephen Curry dropped only 16 points. A lot of people forget about that. A lot of people forget about Draymond's scoring, but I digress. So he is their type. That is the type of player that he is. He is a Draymond Green, someone who is willing to do all of the dirty work and someone who is willing to hustle and to get back on defense, to do all sorts of things. If a team needs a shot on offense, he will be there. If a team needs a passer, he'll be there. Team needs to get boards, he'll also be there. He's one of those players. And as a team that is contending, you want one of those players on your team. That is one of the best players you could have. Like, someone who's willing to do everything else for the team, because they already have the 2 good scorers. Well, technically, they already have 3 good scorers, because I didn't account for Julius Randle coming back. So Julius Randle comes back, that's 1 scorer. Jalen Brunson's already there, 2 scorers, and DiVincenzo, 3 scorers right there. These guys can each go off, dropping at least 30 points, and it's still, while they lack defense, those 3 players, they still have other players on the team that could play the defense for them, and even substitute in, like Bogdanovic, and score as well. Now, Bogdanovic is a little bit of a bad example in this game, because he did end the game 0 for 2 from the field, and did not have a single point, playing 22 minutes, by the way. However, players like McBride and Precious Achiuwa, again, forgive me if I botched that last name, I just call him Precious most of the time, ends the game with like a decent 13 points, then you're good with the scoring. Like, you can't even be mad at players who, like, consistently average players. You cannot be mad at consistently average players, because if they constantly drop 13 points every single game, those 2 players get at least 13 points every single game, they're in a good spot, because their role is not entirely to score. That's Jalen Brunson's role, that's DiVincenzo's role, etc. Those players, those are the scorers. Now, with the Sixers, on the other hand, I really think that they should just terminate the season. Like, they should not wait until Joel Embiid gets back, because he might rush, like, from his injury, and that might end up being worse for the organization as a whole, because despite my opinions on Joel Embiid, it really seems like this team needs Joel Embiid in order to do something. And right now they're fighting for a play-in spot with the 7th seed. And assuming that all of these teams, like the Miami Heat, they all keep playing like how they've been playing, it really seems like they're going to get on the bottom end of those play-in games. Now, obviously, if Joel Embiid returns and they have a late season surge because of Joel Embiid, that could work. But then again, they're putting themselves in an increasingly more difficult spot to make it far in the playoffs, because they'd be the 6th seed at most, if they are still in the playoffs. They'll be the 6th seed going up against the 5th seed, or vice versa. Really doesn't. Actually, no, the 6th seed going up against the 3rd seed. Excuse me, that was my bad. Or a 5th seed going up against the 4th seed. And these are situations that you don't really want to put Joel Embiid in, because they're known for not making it past the 2nd round. And they need that high seed. They need all the advantage that they can get. And even with that high seed, they still aren't reliable. But I digress. They need to wait for Joel Embiid to return. And I don't think that's going to come. That shouldn't be rushed, and it shouldn't come this season, because the Boston Celtics, they already outplay Philly every single time. You can look at all of the playoff series that Boston has played against Philly. They always win. It's just something that happens. It's like, it always happens. Joel Embiid just cannot beat the Celtics. They are his kryptonite, and it fits because the Celtics are green. So, with all of this in mind, and I don't see a point in Joel Embiid returning for this season. And, I mean, there's still a chance that they could beat the Bucks. I will say that. If they do match up against the Bucks in the playoffs, maybe they'll beat them. Maybe. You guys know how I feel about Doc Rivers, so maybe they'll beat him. But I don't want to touch on Doc Rivers this moment, because I probably will touch on him. I probably will talk about him tomorrow or another day after that, if they end up losing to the Sixers without Joel Embiid, because the Bucks and the Sixers, they play Joel Embiid. Not Joel Embiid. They play the Sixers tomorrow, not today. They play tomorrow at 8:00. So we will see if the Bucks can end up pulling through without needing to deal with Joel Embiid. Should make the job a little bit easier. And with that, we are out of time for this second segment. So now we are going to go into our third segment, where we do a quick recap of all the NBA games that went down. And later, I'm going to reveal exactly what the fourth segment of the show is, because there is that fourth segment. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier in the first segment. I hope I did. But we still have... I really think you guys are going to like the fourth segment, because it's going to be talking about... I'm not going to talk about much, but it's going to be talking about an old head in quotes, and his opinions on a certain basketball player. If you guys have been paying attention to the news, then you probably know exactly what what I'm talking about. But if not, I'll reveal that towards the end of the third show segment, right after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be doing a quick recap of all the games that went down last night. I already did a recap of like the two big games for me. The Knicks going up against Philly, and the Clippers going up against Minnesota. Minnesota, as the meme would say. But now we are going to go into another big game, which is the Indiana Pacers beating the Oklahoma City Thunder 121-111. Now, I say this about OKC every single time. Like, they win against some really competitive teams, but then they find themselves losing against teams that they shouldn't be losing to. And the Pacers are one of those teams. Now, the Pacers, again, they are a hit-or-miss team. If they are absolutely on with the three ball, if they are hitting their shots, no one is really going to be able to beat them. However, if they aren't hitting their shots, that's when they become a weak team. And they become a weak team because they do not have any type of defense to fall back on. I say this every single time on the show segment when talking about the Pacers, but it becomes much more apparent whenever you watch them play. They just do not give an effort on defense. And realistically, why would you want to give that much of an effort on defense when you can just put all your effort in on offense? That's the thinking that a lot of these players have, and I don't agree with it whatsoever. Because if your offense isn't there, what do you do? Right now, Tyrese Halliburton, he is not the player that everyone thought that he was in the in-season tournament. The in-season tournament had everybody fooled. He is not the player that people thought. He's a great passer. Yes, he's a great playmaker. But in terms of scoring the ball, no, he is not there whatsoever. And you notice that the talk about Halliburton has died down. You haven't really heard much of Halliburton, have you? He ended the game with 18 points, 8 of 15 from the field. Wasn't bad, but then again, this is coming from a player who was like being hyped up as being better than Trae Young, who averages 26 while still averaging the exact same amount of assists. Like, in what world is he better than Trae Young? In what world? It does not make any sense to me. And he was talked about as being one of the best point guards in the league right now. Like, I'm sorry, the best point guard in the league doesn't average, like, he averages a load of assists. Yes, I will give him that. He is a phenomenal player. But compared to someone like Trae Young, compared to someone like Shai, compared to someone like Luka, Steph Curry, those guys are great point guards. Those guys are great point guards. And some people might not consider Steph Curry a point guard, but more on that in that fourth segment. So they ended the game. Every single one of the starters ended the game with double-digit points for the Pacers. Aaron Nesmith ended the game with 15. Halliburton, like I said earlier, ended the game with 18. Pascal Siakam also ended the game with 18. Miles Turner ended the game with 24, along with 4 blocks as well, which is pretty impressive. And Andrew Nembhard ended the game with 14 points. Now, that was obviously, this is a common theme for the Pacers. Every single time they get their star players and their starting lineup to get in double-digit points, they always push the ball up the court, every single time. And it's not like this Thunder team really played that bad. I mean, Shai ended the game with 30 points again and 10 rebounds, which is really impressive. I mean, seeing Shai get 10 rebounds when there's someone like Chet on the field is really impressive. Ended the game 12 of 27 from the field. He was 1 for 7 from 3. So, one of the things about Shai's game that is really different is the fact that he doesn't really shoot that many threes. He is a mid-range assassin. That's sort of where his best shots come from. That's where he's most efficient at, in that mid-range. And it's a lost art in this league. Like, actively hunting for mid-ranges is a lost art. And some of the best players actually hunt for mid-ranges. And that's how they get a lot of efficient and easy shots. I mean, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, they're considered the 2 best shooting guards. Dwayne Wade, they all played in that mid-range area. And they've all been doing that same thing. So, with that in mind, I mean, looking for mid-ranges, now at least, it's a little bit concerning, because, the mid-range, again, the math behind it is that it's an inefficient shot. You're getting a layup, you're getting as many points as a layup, but you're shooting the ball from farther, and it's not as consistent. So, with that in mind, it's really tough to assess whether these shots are going to be good shots or whether they're going to be consistent shots come playoff time. Because that's the real reason why a lot of these teams don't like taking those mid-ranges. Because, it's a different shot 9 out of 10 times. It's not as easy as, committing a player to muscle memory shooting in a corner. Because when a defender is in the corner, or, when someone is in the corner, when a shooter is in the corner, shooting, I said corner 50 times, getting ready to shoot, he already has what type of shot. He already has the shot that he's going to shoot in his mind. He already knows how much strength he needs, where he needs to arc the ball, those kind of things. Obviously, nobody's perfect, so nobody is going to hit that corner 3 every single time. But in the mind of the offense and in the mind of the player, he knows exactly what shot he's going for. Now, when you're taking mid-ranges like Shai, you don't entirely know what shot you're going to be going for. Are you going to go for the mid-range in the elbow? Are you going to go for a deeper mid-range? And the shot changes every time, while at the same time still only getting you 2 points. And that's sort of been the logic behind the mid-range and why it's been an unreliable shot and why teams don't really like taking it anymore. So, come playoff time, not entirely sure if this is the best approach. Chet Holmgren ended the game with 15 points and 13 rebounds. A lot of people like to comment on his efficiency, and his efficiency being the reason why he's Rookie of the Year. Well, 6 of 16 from the field. He ended with more shot attempts than points. Victor Wembanyama's better. But I digress. So, with this game, I mean, it obviously still raises questions for the Thunder. What is their true ceiling? We have no idea what their true ceiling is, because they keep beating these great teams, but then they end up losing to some mediocre teams. And it's why are you losing to these mediocre teams after beating such great teams? it does not make any sense to me. And it's like, it really is like, it's concerning. Like, their most recent disappointing loss was against the Lakers. I mean, after beating the Suns in March. Like, on Sunday, March 3rd, they beat the Suns 118-110. Then they go to the LA and they end up losing to the Lakers. How does that work? Granted, might be because they came off of a back-to-back. So coming off of back-to-back games is like really, it's a difficult task. It's not something that's easy. However, did they come off a back-to-back in this game? No, they did not. They did not come off a back-to-back in this game. So there was no excuse for them losing to this Pacers team. Moving on to some other games. Oh, you guys are going to love this one. The Bucks ended up losing again to the Kings. Now, the Kings, they're full of a bunch of snubs. I'm not even going to lie to you guys. These Kings are full of snubs. De'Aaron Fox got snubbed. Domantas Sabonis also got snubbed. He was top 10 in the MVP ladder. And he didn't even get an All-Star appearance. Like, this is why the fan voting needs to be abolished. Because nobody in the fan votes wanted Sabonis in that All-Star game. Why? He's a triple-double, he's a double-double machine. And arguably a triple-double machine as well. Does not make any sense to me. And it shows that a lot of these people don't know basketball. Sabonis ended the game 22 points, 11 rebounds, 8 assists. De'Aaron Fox, also having a phenomenal season, also got snubbed at the point guard position, by the way. Ended the game with 29 points, 7 assists, and 6 rebounds. And Malik Monk, who comes off the bench, ended the game with 25 points, shot 9 of 19 from the field. I believe that him and De'Aaron Fox, they combined for 54 points. So, really, the fact that these two players, and Sabonis, if you want to add Sabonis in there, I mean, I wouldn't really want to add Sabonis in there because that just would be unfair, to that scoring list. Now, Harrison Barnes, he ended the game with 16 points, 6 of 12. Kevin Huerter ended the game 4 of 10 from the field. And overall, dominant win for the Kings. They shot 45% from 3, 53% from the field, and that's sort of been the difference maker compared to the Bucks in this game. The Bucks ended up shooting 7 for 39 from 3. Damian Lillard ended the game 2 of 12. He is a problem. It's come to the point where Damian Lillard is a problem to this team. Right now, he's just shot chucking. He's not he's not making consistent enough production for this team. And I'm starting to think that it might be because there's a little bit of pressure. There's a lot more pressure and a lot more expectations coming in for Damian Lillard in this season because he's on the Bucks and because he's on a great team. So, with this in mind, it makes sense how he's struggling to shoot the ball really efficiently. I mean, 2 for 12 from the field. And this is, I'm sorry, but this bad shooting, it's been going on the entirety of this season. And I blame it on Doc Rivers a lot of the time because he doesn't make the adjustments that he needs to. But Damian Lillard is not out of the woods when it comes to the reason why this Bucks team isn't where they should be. That is a major problem. I'm sorry, it is a big problem because this terrible shooting is hurting the team more than it is helping the team. And on Portland, there was really no pressure and he could take whatever shot he wants. But now he needs to be consistent. He's not being consistent whatsoever. He shouldn't have been an all-star this year. A lot of people don't, after looking at his numbers compared to Trae Young's numbers, Jalen Brunson's numbers, all of those numbers, he should not have been an all-star starter this year, but I digress. Giannis Antetokounmpo ended the game 30 points, 13 rebounds. He does everything in his power that he can to try to make this Bucks team win, and it's just they cannot do it. And it's infuriating. Fire Doc Rivers. He's going to be fired at the end of this season, most likely. I would fire him at the end of this season. I'd find a completely new coach because I am sorry, cannot stand him. That's just me, though. And again, nobody shot well in this game. And it's like, why are they taking so many shots if they're not shooting well? But they should not have lost that game. Now, let's move on to another team in the Eastern Conference that's better. The Boston Celtics. They ended the game 123-107 against the Utah Jazz. 51 wins this season. I'm not entirely sure if I mentioned this in the last podcast, but they were the first team to reach 50 wins. And the cherry on top is that Jason Tatum ended this game with 38 points. So he went off this game in a game that they absolutely needed him to go off. Derek White also went off, ended the game with 24 points. Drew Holiday, 16 points. There was no Kristaps Porzingis in this game, but that's absolutely no problem. This team has enough offense and enough defense to produce. Also, no Jaylen Brown in this game, so they really needed that. They really needed that sort of that performance from Jason Tatum in order to keep them afloat. Even though this Utah Jazz team is rebuilding, not really much that needs to be touched upon with this game. Because, again, like the Utah Jazz, they're rebuilding. They do have great pieces on offense, but their defense is kind of suspect. Which is ultimately what really hurts the Utah Jazz. And what hurts a lot of teams. Because their offense is there. It's just the defense. It's really, really bad. And I don't really need to talk much about this game because it's it's a top team going up against a rebuilding team. I mean, we expected these kind of results from Boston. And there's nothing really much that needs to be said. Next, we're going to talk about the Wizards going up against the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, two bottom-feeding teams. So, now recently, I haven't really talked much about the Wizards on this podcast. So, Jordan Poole, he's been on the bench, and he's been coming off the bench, and he's still the same player that everyone expects him. He's still the exact same player. He is an arrogant and cocky basketball player who sees himself as the best player on the floor every second of the day. And there's nothing wrong with seeing yourself as the best basketball player on the floor. You just have to play like it. And he doesn't play like it. This is far from what we thought he was going to do on the Wizards. Because, again, he has the green light to take whatever kind of shot he wants. Now, the fact that he's not being consistent with those shot selections is ridiculous to me. He's infuriating to watch. There was this one moment in the season where he literally just walked up from, he shot the ball from literally half court. He literally just walked up the court and just threw it up there like he's Steph Curry, and it didn't even hit the rim. And I'm like, what are you doing? Do you practice that shot? Last I checked, you are not Steph Curry. Last I checked, you are not LeBron James on a heat check. But, I just don't know, what's the thinking behind them. I really don't. Because I don't think we've ever seen a player that has the green light to shoot, that's been talked about as being the next man up, who has his own team. I don't think I've ever seen him get worse and get benched. I don't think that's ever happened. And there's so much money to his contract. Right now, the Wizards are in a very difficult situation. And, Kyle Kuzma, he's still, performing. He's still a baller, but he's not going to be enough for this team to make it over the hump. Now, I really think it would be funny if this Wizards team ends up losing to the Pistons. I think it would be hilarious if they end up losing, because remember, Kyle Kuzma, he tweeted in the beginning of the season, just don't be that team, referencing the Pistons. And so far, the Wizards have the exact same record as the Pistons. They are bad. Not really much that needs to be talked about with this game. No Ja Morant. Ja Morant's been out for the entirety of the season, so most of the season. So, no problem for this Grizzlies team going up against a Wizards team that's really struggling on the defense and really struggling on the offense. So, not much that needs to be said. Last game, before we wrap this segment up, is the Spurs going up against the Houston Rockets. It was a relatively low-scoring game, 103-101. Victor Wembanyama ended the game with 13 and 10. Now, this team with the Spurs, it's like they're up and down. They have their moments, but most of the time they have their bad moments, and they're just 1 point guard away from making this team a little bit more competitive than straight bottom feeders. And this Houston team, they really need to build it. Unfortunately, I totally didn't talk about this before, but Sengun went out with an injury a few games ago, and now this sort of puts Houston in a problem because Sengun is that player that you need to build around, and when he's not there on the team, I'm not entirely sure how much. I don't know if this team can make a play-in push. I don't know if this team is going to be able to make that push to the play-in. I think the play-in is locked for the Lakers and the Golden State Warriors, and no team is going to be able to back them or going to be able to pass them. So I think now Houston should really be on like a tanking mode. They should try to build through the draft now to see if they can get something else for Sengun to work with, because realistically this team isn't going to go nowhere. This team isn't going to make it far, but he suffered a grade 3 sprained ankle and he's going to miss the rest of the season. So with this in mind, I think they should just cancel the rest of the season. Like, that's it for Houston. They should build through that draft. But with that, we are out of time, and that's all the games that ended up going down with the NBA recap. So next we are going to go into the fourth segment where we talk about if Steph Curry is really a point guard or if he's not a point guard, because Isaiah Thomas from the Pistons had a lot to say about that on Draymond Green's podcast. So I'll be right back after this short break. And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about Isaiah Thomas and his opinions on Steph Curry. Now, recently on the Draymond Green podcast, he said that Steph Curry should not be a top point guard of all time. He should not be in the discussion for being a top point guard. He believes that the Golden State Warriors superstar Steph Curry isn't a true point guard. Zeke feels that Curry's style of play doesn't mimic what a traditional point guard does, which is why he thinks it's Draymond who plays point for the Warriors. Now, here's the quote. Let me just tell you what I think. Well, I'm going to say it in his words. Let me just tell you what I think about point guards. On the Golden State Warriors, you are the point guard. You have more assists than Steph Curry. You bring the ball up. You initiate the offense. You set the defense. You run the show. Steph comes off the screens. He catches and he shoots. And obviously, like, we know Isaiah. If you guys don't know who Isaiah Thomas is, Isaiah Thomas was a former point guard for the Detroit Pistons, and he was infamously the leader of the Bad Boy Pistons. They ended up winning back-to-back championships in the early, in the 1980s, in the late 80s, 1988, 1989, and obviously, like, winning 2 championships and being a point guard himself, he does have some credibility in talking basketball. However, I do not think I think he's very, very biased. Now, Zeke, he has a history of, like, really talking down on a lot of the current players in today's league. And he also has a tendency of trying to bolster his resume and trying to sort of boost his, I don't want to say his ego, but he does have a tendency of trying to make himself look better or sound better by putting down other players. Now, obviously he doesn't do that all the time, so I'm not really accusing him of doing that 24/7. However, this is a good example of that, because him saying that Steph Curry is not a point guard, to me, is absolutely blasphemous, because he's saying he's not a point guard just because he doesn't bring the ball up. We're acting like Steph can't bring the ball up if he doesn't want to. It's just the coach, Steve Kerr, is so smart as a coach. He knows that Steph Curry could bring much more value to the team than to just bring the ball up. And he also knows that Draymond Green can also bring much more value to the Golden State Warriors if he's bringing the ball up as well. It's not like Steph can't handle being a point guard and can't handle the ball in his hands 24/7. Obviously he knows how to do that. It's just he doesn't, because the team gets a lot more out of him running around screens, shooting that three-pointer, because he can do that. And regardless, he can create the shot himself if he wants to. However, it's a lot easier to create a shot off a screen than it is coming off of an isolation, because isolation is probably the most difficult offense to run in basketball, because you have no help from anyone else. It is just you. You got to be the bucket getter. You got to make the play. And let's not act like Isaiah Thomas was making the play 24/7 every single time. He wasn't even a Finals MVP in 1989. Joe Dumars was a Finals MVP. And, it just... Maybe I'm just a little bit, biased against Zeke, because I do not like Isaiah Thomas. I'm not a big fan of Isaiah Thomas because of, his ridiculous opinions on 80s basketball, 90s basketball, and current NBA players, because he talks as if he doesn't know really know how this game is played now, and he doesn't like how the game is played now, and it's sort of he insults some of these players, saying that Steph Curry isn't a point guard simply because he doesn't consider him as a top point guard and he shouldn't be in that conversation is blasphemous. Because you want to know what I think it is? You want to know who else played point guard? Isaiah Thomas. So if you have Steph Curry as a point guard, that means you probably have him over Isaiah Thomas. So if you change the narrative, he's not really a point guard, get him out of the conversation, that leaves room for Isaiah Thomas to be in that conversation. And I don't agree with that whatsoever. He didn't explicitly say this, but it does feel like it's implied. Now, at least that's my take on it. And because he's the shortest player on the court. Now, that's point guard. 9 out of 10 times, that is point guard, and they fall under point guard. And just because he doesn't bring the ball up doesn't mean anything. Is Kyrie not a point guard because he doesn't bring the ball up when he was playing with LeBron James? That's not what the box score said. The box score said he was a point guard. He was matched up against Steph Curry, who was also a point guard. So, and it becomes a little bit more, I will give him this, it does become a little bit more difficult in deciding who is the true point guard of a team because of how positionless the NBA has become now. And I really don't think that positionless basketball should really affect much on positions. I mean, we know that Steph Curry is a point guard. It is clear cut because we've seen what he can do with the ball in his hands. We've seen that he can make the plays. It's just he chooses not to, and the coach chooses to not let him do that because he can do so much more. And it's part of his strengths, and the coach just decides this is because let's face it, Guarding a 3-on-3 is much more difficult than guarding a 1-on-1. And we're not going to act like Steph Curry can't run the plays himself. He doesn't need to do that if he has a bunch of players to set him screens, because it's a lot easier for him to score off of the catch and shoot because of how good of a shooter he is. So that shouldn't really be taken into account. And just because Draymond handles the ball and like he brings the ball up and like tends to run the offense a lot because of his playmaking, that doesn't mean that he is the point guard. That like he's a ball handler, he's a floor general, yes. Point guard? No. He is not a point guard. And part of that has to do with his height. I mean, voice crack, good lord. 6'7", 6'8". Draymond Green is not a point guard. He is a power forward. If anything, he is a point forward. He has everything that you need in a playmaker. And yes, Draymond is a playmaker for that team, but saying that he's the point guard is like, it feels like it's diminishing what Curry does on the court, because we've seen Curry handle the ball himself. We've seen him run the offense himself when Draymond Green is out, when other players are out. We've seen him do all these things. Just because he comes off a screen and shoots the ball does not mean he's not a point guard. Paul Pierce actually said this same thing, and I don't know why these like old players, they have the same take. Like, these old players that try to boost their resume, they have this same take, trying to take down other players. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to me, because Paul Pierce, he once said, Steph Curry is a wing guy. He is a wing. And I'm like, what the heck is a wing player? What is that? Just because, like, yes, he stays on the wing because he could shoot from out there. Like, what is a wing player? What is that? What is that? I don't know what that is. But, like, they just... It's common. They just make things up to try to hinder every single one of the players. And I know Paul Pierce does this because he is still bitter about losing to LeBron and LeBron being his father. He is still bitter about that. And I'm not surprised that... And Zeke is still bitter about a lot of things. He's bitter about how he did not shake Jordan's hands. He's bitter about how he wasn't selected for Team USA because Jordan didn't want him there. He's bitter about how he's not even in a conversation for being one of the best point guards in the league because Curry is here. And he always... It's odd. I just don't understand why a bunch of these old heads and a bunch of these like old players, they don't appreciate how the game has evolved, and they don't acknowledge like these new players up and coming. I don't understand it. Shaq, he acknowledges Steph Curry to the T. He gives him all of his flowers, and that's an example of someone who knows his ball and who knows, like, obviously, like, there are I will say Shaq does have some takes on some centers that aren't really all that. However, he does have some very good takes on centers. Like, a question was brought up, like, what do you think you would do if you were in the league right now? And he said, I'm already in the league. Look at Giannis. And that is ridiculous levels of respect. And it makes total sense because Giannis is dominant. So was Shaq. It only makes sense. Like, those takes make sense. Saying that Steph Curry is not a point guard just because the plays are run around him running screens, no, that is not ideal. That's just the offense that they run. That's the brilliant mind of Steve Kerr at work. But that is just my personal opinion, because it's difficult to guard a 3-on-3. It's much more difficult to guard a 3-on-3 and communicate rather than it is to guard a 1-on-1 where you just have to try and stay in front of the defender. But with that, we are out of time for this segment, and that is the end of the show. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. Please remember to use the link in the description or the link that is displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Helps the show, makes the show much more interactive. And once again, that's the end of the show. Thank you guys once again for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee